All right, so here we are for chapter 21. Now we're getting to the action of the battles. For APUS history, you don't really need to know every single battle, but I guess there are some important battles and how they fought it usually. But if it was military history, then we should know every single thing. So don't sweat it if you don't know the how every battle was won. There's just some few major ones that you would need to know. So 1861 to 1865 is really the time of the battles of the Civil War. So after the Fort Sumter, it was already um, figured that it was going to be a small battle. The reason why they thought this is because their capitals, DC and Richmond in Virginia, the Confederacy capital, were just like 100 miles apart. It was it was not so far from each other, so they believed it was going to be confined just to that region in Virginia within 100 miles, but it's going to be all over the place as far as Mississippi River, close to Arkansas and stuff like that. This is today's Manassas. This is south of, well, this is kind of northern Virginia, and they're gonna head to each other's capital, and that would be the goal. So the North was kind of arrogant. They thought that they were on the good side, and so they didn't know that the South were going to be they're going to fight through the thick and thin. And they had a good man named Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is going to be the general in this fight, and the one for the North. Oh, I guess he's not named here. I think it was McClellan. But in any case, they were going to the North came down, right? And everyone thought that the North was going to win. And so people from DC actually brought picnic tables, and they thought they could watch this spectator for sport for fun. Stonewall Jackson, though, when they started to fight, the Yankees were so scared. The North were so scared that they actually retreated, and the Southerners didn't retreat. They scared them off. And so they knew that the North had to not be too cocky about this battle. Because of their cockiness, they lost the first one. So it had a psychological impact in their first battle. The North went straight in, then went back out. They were so scared. Their egos too inflated. And because of that, the South got cocky now because of that first battle. So Southern enlistments fell sharply, and people started to think that the South is already, this is going to be an easy war to defeat the North. Okay, now they selected George McClellan. He was given commander of the Army of the Potomac. Now the Potomac River is by the Virginia River. Okay, and they had to cross that to go into Virginia, DC. Okay, now they had a huge army. The North, you can see here, a lot of them are painted. They had a huge army, and they seemed fit to go to war. Okay, but McClellan was overly cautious. Lincoln saying you have to use them. He's taken a while to use his military, and that's because he treated the military like his own children. He didn't want them to suffer and die. Well, that's war. So McClellan had a plan. He said he's not going to go through that Potomac River. He's going to take a boat, and he's going to try to go straight to Richmond this way. But little did he know that he had to pass Yorktown and Williamsburg just to get there. And actually, these places were fortified. It slowed them down. Robert E. Lee is the general of the Southern Confederates, and he did a counterattack when he arrived at Richmond. It drove McClellan's Union armies back to the sea. And so because McClellan failed, Lincoln temporarily abandoned him and had to not use him as the main general. The Union would probably have been restored with minimal disruption to the peculiar institution. Slavery would have survived at least for a time. Okay, so this is the strategy. First, suffocate the South by blockading its coast. Okay, you get the Navy here and prevent any trade from coming in, so they won't get any payments from their cotton. Second, free the slaves so that their economy could fail. Third, cut the Confederacy in half by taking the Mississippi River so that Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana won't be able to send food to the Southerners that way. Fourth, chop the Confederacy in pieces. From this point on, you get Georgia, you get the Carolinas, and you own it, and then you can separate them more. So it's divide and conquer. Decapitate the capital, capture the capital. And six, try everywhere to engage the enemy's main strength and grind it into submission. Ulysses S. Grant said, we got to get the main body of army. If you just get that and you make them lose, then everyone's going to, be weakened. Okay. So now how are they going to blockade? So the first thing is, they suffocate the South by blockading its coast, the war at sea. Now, they would try to have people going into the South, especially, British people and Southerners, they're trading in the Bahamas, right? Because, they can't trade directly. The British cannot land there, but they'll know. If the British land directly in the east coast of America, then they know that the British is cheating. So they would meet in the place to trade goods, and that would be in the Bahamas, in the West Indies port of Nassau, which is the British Bahamas, and then they would trade stuff like that, cotton for money, okay? So they would try to, the Southerners would try to escape their ports, because remember, it was blocked by the North, and then blockade running finally past the Union squadrons gradually pinched off the leading southern ports from New Orleans to Charleston. Yankee captains, for example, would seize British freighters on the high seas if laden with war supplies for the tiny port of Nassau. So the Yankees, the Northerners, would find these British secretly trading with them. And then, so how would the British try to get away with this? They would say, no, we're not going to the South. We're going to Canada. That is our ultimate destination. We're just stopping by the Caribbean. So it wouldn't be enough to arrest them. Resourceful Southerners reconditioned a former wooden U.S. ship, the Merrimack, and plated it with old iron railroad rails, renamed it the Virginia. So they had to, because the main navy was in the north. What they did is they had to build their own navy by being resourceful, by putting ironclads. Same thing with the Union. They also want to make their ships made out of iron. Remember, back then the ships were made out of wood, but they started using iron ships. Today we use, steel and iron ships, right? Mainly steel ships. So, but now they're starting to stop using the wooden ship at this battle. Okay, the pivotal point, Antietam, the second battle Bull Run. The first battle was the one where the Union surrendered and embarrassed themselves. So they're having it again. And Robert E. Lee, Southern general, had a plan. Instead of landing in D.C., why don't he land in Maryland, north of D.C.? Now, the Marylanders didn't join the Southerns, but even though they were a Southern state that had slaves, they didn't join the Confederacy. So Robert E. Lee said, okay, I think this time we can make them join in. Now, Maryland was a border state, remember? And so what happens is Robert Lee's going to think if we land there, people will naturally rebel and leave the Union when they see us singing our songs, and they will join us. However, the Marylanders did not join in. There was all quietness. And so they had a battle in Antietam Creek, Maryland. Lincoln, yielding to popular pressure, hastily restored Little Mac to active command of the main army. Now, this Union soldier was lucky. He found Robert Lee's battle plans on the floor and showed it to the general. And so they could have caught Robert E. Lee. He was divided, and so his numbers were smaller. McClellan succeeded in halting Lee at Antietam on September 17 in one of the bitterest and bloodiest days of the war. This is the Battle of Antietam. Jefferson Davis was perhaps never again so near a victory as on that fateful summer day. So they were so close to winning that battle, but it was like a tie. So they realized that Lincoln had to change the direction of the war by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation is basically proclaiming that all the slaves are free. Okay, so this was a desperate move. Now, why would he have to announce this after this battle? Why would this be a necessary move from Abraham Lincoln? Okay, so the Emancipation Proclamation, he's going to change the character of the war. The purpose of the war is going to be against slavery. Bondsmen in the loyal states were not affected, nor were those in specific conquered areas in the South. Okay, so now this is weird. Why are you going to announce all the slaves are free in the North? Aren't they already free? There's no slavery in the North. So why would he say all the slaves are free? Now, if he said it to the South, you could say, well, why would the Southern states who already left follow Lincoln? That's not their president. It's Jefferson Davis. So why would he do it? Where he could not, that is the Confederate states, he tried to. Where he could, he would not. And where he would, he could not. What does this mean? In the border states, he says, don't worry, guys, you can keep your slaves. Maryland, Tennessee, Missouri, you can keep your slaves. Don't worry. This is only for the Southerners. So it was like he didn't even allow for slaves to be free. But what he did is when he announced this to the South, all the slaves are free, a lot of slaves escaped the South and went to the North, and they went to the Union Army. They even joined the military. Okay. So there was a huge support for Lincoln when he did this, especially European support, because the people liked what Lincoln did, and the British people pressured their British government to not support the South. So did the French people pressured their French government to not support the South for the sake of their cotton. So this is why it helped. Okay. And not only that, a lot of blacks, 108,000 blacks, that's when they applied. It boosted the enlistment to 10%. A lot of African Americans joined the military. The slaves, when they got captured, they joined the military. So a lot of blacks were able to support in this sense. Okay, now Robert E. Lee is going to get desperate. He's going to try to go further above D.C. to go really scare the North. If he's really getting close, he's going to go to Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg was kind of like an accident. There's some guys looking for shoes, and then they see a Northern man, see a Southern, they see Southern, and then they start fighting, and then it grows little by little, more and more. Hundreds come in, then thousands come in. Finally, it's 76,000 versus 92,000, full-on battle. And then they went to the point of picket fighting. Picket fighting is when you stop shooting and you just charge at each other. Now, this charge is actually very scary. If you see someone charging, that's when you would retreat, right? And that was the goal is, when you charge, is also you're risking your life, is death, because yeah, you're going to see them face to face, and they could shoot you or stab you, but it'll scare the enemy, and that's what they're hoping to do. But what if the enemy doesn't get scared? What if they also charge too, to show that no, we're not afraid, we're going to charge too? So General George Pickett, okay, who is of the South, he is going to try to do a charge. George Pickett of the North is going to do a charge, but it didn't break the Confederate attack. It broke the heart of the Confederate cause. This, Pickett's charge has been called the high tide of Confederacy. Actually, George Pickett is of the south, and he failed with that charge, and they thought it was going to motivate his people. The Confederate peace delegation was moving under a flag of truce toward the Union lines near Norfolk, Virginia. Jefferson Davis hoped his negotiations would arrive in Washington. So now that they are getting desperate, they're now going to try to sue for peace. They're going to try to sue for peace. Lincoln doesn't want peace. Why would he want to make peace? Now, the South wants to use this as a trick, and it's going to try to ruin Lincoln and to not finish the war. Now, we'll talk about why this was going to be a dilemma. Okay. Let me see if it's coming up soon. Okay. Okay, Lincoln didn't want to get peace with the South. He didn't want to stop the war. Okay, because if he stopped it, then they would still keep their slavery going. He has to go in there and change the whole system down south. That's his ultimate goal, and it's a more difficult goal. So that's why he didn't want that. Okay, Lee's last lunge. So we talked about this. He went up into Gettysburg. Now we're getting into the war in the West. Now this is mostly happening in the East side, like in the eastern states. But what about in the West, like in Tennessee? And there's this place called Fort Donelson and Fort Henry. And this is where Ulysses S. Grant rises to fame. Now, if you don't know Ulysses S. Grant, he's the guy in your $50 bill. He's also the guy on Mount Rushmore where the 4 presidents are carved in that huge rock, right? And Ulysses S. Grant, his plan as a general is to make them surrender unconditionally, meaning that there are no conditions. You cannot demand anything. You cannot say, hey, I'll give you your troops back if you give me my troops. No, you have to just surrender. There's no condition. I'm not going to give you anything. Just surrender because I'm going to full on destroy you. That is what Ulysses S. Grant's plan was. Okay, so he was rising to fame because he was slowly capturing these forts on the side, which was important to get the whole Mississippi River. Right. So Grant's triumph in Tennessee, where he captured Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, it would not only riveted Kentucky more securely to the Union, but also opened the gateway to the strategically important region of Tennessee. So now that he took Tennessee, and now he could finally go to the rivers of the Cumberland rivers. Okay, to finally get into Georgia. Grant's next attempt is to get the junction of the main Confederate North and East railroads in the Mississippi Valley, Corinth, Mississippi. Corinth, Mississippi is a junction, meaning it's like an intersection. This is where they trade. This is where they meet to trade in Mississippi, and this is where they pass the food from southwest or the west to the east. So if he takes over that, then they cannot send food. So they had the Battle of Shiloh. They're trying to protect the Southerners, trying to protect that intersection. But Grant successfully counterattacked. Now this is strange because they tried to jump or ambush Ulysses S. Grant, but Ulysses S. Grant wasn't surprised. He pulled himself together and then he jumped them back, meaning he ambushed them back. Right? It's like he's trying to scare them, but he ends up scaring them in return. Okay. Now this, so slowly Lincoln is getting impressed by this guy, Ulysses Grant. He's just a regular guy, but he's rising up the ranks, better than McClellan. And then people try to criticize Ulysses Grant, saying, hey, that Grant though, he drinks too much. And the president says, find me that brand. I'm going to give it to all my other generals, and maybe they'll become bolder. Maybe they'll grow a pair. Okay. David G. Farragut. Now, also to get Mississippi, you needed a navy, right? And David G. Farragut is going to be there to capture New Orleans. Now, remember, New Orleans is the mouth or the entrance of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. You got to capture this city so then you could capture and send your boats, your ships down into the river to control the rest of the whole river up, all the way up to the north, to divide the South in 2 parts. But in order to do that, in the end, you have to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Port Hudson, Louisiana. And that's the Vicksburg part is going to be Grant's plan. He has to capture that so then the ships won't be bombarded by Vicksburg Southerners, right? If you capture that, then they cannot have any Navy ship because they have cannons facing the Mississippi River. So it says Grant was given command of the Union forces attacking Vicksburg, and in the teeth of grave difficulties, displayed rare skill and daring. The siege of Vicksburg was his best fought campaign of the war. The city surrendered. Okay, now he didn't attack the front. He made him think he would. He made him think he was just passing by, but actually he was going around to attack their back. So that's how he was pretty sly. The Union victory at Vicksburg came the day after the Confederate defeat at Gettysburg. So it's showing that there's more defeats coming in. So the Mississippi River now is open to the north, and the north now controls the Mississippi River and even the Ohio River Valley. The twin victories also conclusively tipped the diplomatic scales in favor of the north as Britain stopped delivery of the Laird's son. So this is like everything is starting to grow good for the Northern Union. Even the shipping is stopping from the British. So the Southerners are like really getting weaker. They're not even getting their ships from the British anymore. So everything is looking like it's going downhill for the South. Okay, and the North, it's working out. Sherman scorches Georgia. So, okay, here's a little battle plan. So you can see in green what Ulysses Grant does. Takes Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. You can see how he had to take that to take Corinth. This is where he would go this way, and they know that this is the only way to go to capture the junction. So they capture this, and then Vicksburg, and now David F. Farragut could come in. Now David F. Farragut was amazing because there was forts here shooting down at him. He says, "I'm just going to gun it, and go right through it. Hopefully, no one hits me." He goes right through it with his entire navy, and surprisingly, the cannonballs missed, and he goes in to capture Port Hudson. And they thought New Orleans was going to defend Port Hudson. It was vulnerable, so they were able to capture it while Ulysses Grant captures Vicksburg, and then they could combine each other's forces. Okay. Now that this is all taken care of, now they could focus here and head to Georgia, and they start going to Chattanooga. Okay. In the city of Chattanooga, where Grant won a series of engagements. Okay. And now to conquer Georgia, Sherman had a different plan. So Sherman was also a famous general. He's going to capture Atlanta. Now, usually in war, they try to be connected to their base, but the reason why you want to be connected to your base because you want to get foods and supplies and ammunition and whatever from your base. So do not cut off your line. Kind of you keep stretching your line. But Tecumseh Sherman says no, cut off the line. Do not get resources from our base. We're going to get it from the enemy, which means we have to defeat the enemy at all costs, no matter what, in order to survive. But if we think that, hey, don't worry, we got our resources, then we can slow down. So Sherman didn't do it that way. So Sherman had to really destroy the economy, eat all the food, and then take it from their homes. So it really weakened the morale because now they're attacking the homeland and not just soldiers of the South. Okay, but this is war. He has to do whatever it takes. So he captures Savannah as a Christmas gift. This is South Carolina. So Georgia, and then going up, then he's going to capture Savannah, going up Columbia, going up to Fayetteville, to Raleigh. You can see how the South is surrendering in these places, and there's only a few more places left to go. Okay, politics of war. There's an election coming up again 4 years later. So 1860, 1864. Now, this was a little tough for Lincoln because the Democrats wanted to make peace. The Republicans had to keep going. Now, it's very tempting to make peace because if you make peace, then you don't have to fight. Soldiers don't have to die anymore. But if you make peace with the South, all you're doing is making the South feel like we're going to respect you as a nation. And then it'll be like, if you want peace, then you have to respect our slavery. So the war wouldn't have accomplished anything if they made peace. Lincoln says, no, we're not going to make peace. The only time you want to make peace is if you give up slavery, and then there'll be peace. So they had an election. Lincoln, of course, won. The Democrat who was going to run against Lincoln was General McClellan, the guy who Lincoln fired. Go figure why he would go against them. So there were some anti-Lincoln Republicans. The Mac will win the Union back. That's what they really believed. Okay, finally, Grant was sent. Sherman took care of Georgia, the Carolinas, and now Grant is moved from the West Theater and moving back into the East states. And he is going to take over McClellan's job. He rises to the ranks, and he's going to chase Robert E. Lee. Okay, now remember they fired McClellan, right? And Grant outlasts Lee. So Grant finally gets to chase Robert E. Lee down to Virginia, down into the wilderness of the Manassas, down to Richmond. And it's simple. There was no trick. Grant had a lot of strategy going here. Grant was very, very straightforward. Just knock at the front door. We have more men than he does statistically. So yes, of course, you just keep going. He'll eventually surrender. We don't need to worry about the number of troops, okay, that we have. We always have more. So Grant ordered a frontal assault at the hard position. Many of them died, but Lee had fewer men. He could not defend anymore, so he starts to retreat, okay? And so now they finally met in this courthouse in Virginia, in Appomattox. He made a deal. And then Lincoln says, surrender and free the slaves. That's it. There's no way you're going to get your nation back. You'll become part of the United States again. Okay, so that was the plan. So they surrendered. 5 days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln gets shot, assassinated at Fort Theater. Now what happens is the one who assassinates him is John Wilkes Booth. He was an actor in the theater, but he had Southern sympathies, Confederate sympathies. Now Lincoln unfortunately told his guard to hey guard, you don't need to bodyguard me anymore. I'm okay. Have a seat. But then because he was unguarded while he was facing the front, some of the actor came behind John Wilkes Booth, shot him in the head, point blank. They brought him to the doctor's house across the movie theater, across the street. Couldn't have saved him, but it was, the end of Lincoln. So he ended the war wisely, but he couldn't see the aftermath of the reconstruction of the Civil War. Okay, so this is just a summary of the money used for the war. $15 billion. The greatest constitutional decision of the century was written in blood and handed down in Appomattox Courthouse near with Lee surrender. The nightmare of the Republic was the supreme test of American democracy. Okay, so Lincoln, victory for Union Army, provided inspiration for champions, the lost cause of the South. So there's this feeling of the lost cause, meaning that they lost, and they still believe that they were in the right. Some Southerners believe it still today that this was their right. So that's why they don't think that it's wrong to have their own right to govern the way they want. In this case, they want to do whatever they want with their slaves without being, interference from the North. So yes. Okay, so that ends the Civil War. Okay, so that's chapter 21. I know I said a different chapter last time, but this is chapter 21. We're more than halfway there. Okay, so this is chapter 22. This is the Civil War has ended. The Union has won. Unfortunately, Lincoln was assassinated. The ordeal of Reconstruction. This is called Reconstruction because this is reconstructing not just buildings or the devastation, the aftermath of the Civil War, but it is reconstructing the economy, the social fabric of America, the culture from the South and the North, uniting everyone together. It's a really process to reconstruct how America was because it's been so separated culturally, socially, economically, and now and it's going to take a long time. So, of course, when the president dies, the vice president takes over. So that was going to be Andrew Johnson, right? He's going to be the next president here. So Johnson pardoned all the rebel leaders, like forgave them. Like forgave them meaning just there's no point to arrest all of them, right? If you're gonna, how do you can't arrest all the South. It's just not impossible. So you have to pardon them so that they could get on with their lives and everyone could get on with becoming united. But there will be some who still want to keep them punished. But the Reconstruction had a lot of problems. Charleston and Richmond are devastated. Banks are destroyed. Businesses lock their doors. Transportation has been broken down completely. Okay, there's a lot of investment loss. 2 billion of them were slaves investment. Now what are they going to do to make money? The South has to recover from all that. Conscious of no crime, former Confederates continued to believe that their view of secession was correct and that the lost cause was still a just war. So they felt like they were still in the right. So that's also a problem too. Now that the blacks are free, they're not slaves anymore. What can they do now? Okay, for many slaves, the shackles of bondage were not struck off in a single mighty blow. Loyalty to the plantation master prompted some slaves to resist the liberating Union armies, while other slaves' pent-up bitterness burst forth violently on the day of liberation. So a lot of the slaves were so, they wanted revenge. They went up to their masters and pillaged and took everything in their house. When, a lot of the slaves now had to test their freedom, search for long lost spouses and families. So it was the end of slavery. Freed men and women, they now got formalized slave marriages. They now had to really get official with it. A lot of them moved to Kansas. These exodus, 5,000 blacks from Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi surged into a mass exodus to Kansas. They were called the Exodusters. African American churches were formed as well from this freedom. And a lot of them had to be educated. The American Missionary Association volunteered as teachers to educate them. Also, the Freedmen's Bureau was established via the agency because they needed to make sure that all of these freed slaves, what are they going to do? They needed food, clothing, Medicare, education. So the Bureau was created for this. Union General Oliver Howard was going to found it, and he would later serve as president of Howard University in D.C. The goal was to teach them how to read. There's a lot of blacks who didn't know how to read, and they wanted to close the gaps themselves. A lot of them just wanted to read the Bible. That was their ultimate goal. I guess is a form of showing their thankfulness to God in that way. Now, a lot of the tracts of land were confiscated, so now they thought that the slaves were going to get their land, right, the Confederates' land. President Johnson, who shared the white supremacist views of most white Southerners, repeatedly tried to kill it, and it expired. Okay, so what was this? This is the renewal of the Bureau. He didn't renew it, the Freedmen's Bureau. So who is this Andrew Johnson who was he racist? He's Lincoln's vice president, but how come he didn't support many of these things? So remember, he was for the poor whites. He was against rich class white people, but he was for the poor whites. So yes, in a sense, he wasn't really for the blacks representing them. He was for the poorer whites, who were suffering also. So that's who he was. Lincoln Union Party in 1864 needed to attract support from the war Democrats. And so they chose pro-Southern guy Johnson, a Democrat, to be the ideal man to win that other part. Okay, so he was a states' rights champion, a Democrat who had never been accepted by the Republicans. So almost like a John Tyler kind of guy. Okay, so Lincoln had this plan, a 10% plan, and it says that a state can come back to the United States, a state who rebelled against, who seceded, one of the southern states. If 10% of them voted in the presidential election, they had to take an oath that they'll be swear allegiance to the United States and agree support emancipation. That's all they had to do. The rest of the 90% of that state, who knows, they could go against the idea of slavery and all that stuff. But Lincoln wanted the state to come back as soon as possible. The Wade Davis bill didn't want 10%, it wanted 50%. Okay, so Lincoln pocket vetoed it. He says, no, I will not sign that. 10% is what is the best way to unite everyone as soon as possible. they could be readmitted only as conquered provinces, right? So that means when they come back, they're going to be a conquered province and they're going to begin their reconstruction. So the goal was to have the South restored. Now there's the radical Republicans. The radical Republicans wanted a stricter punishment. They wanted 50%. They want to punish the South for what they've done. So some people didn't think it was enough. They wanted to give them more punishment. So the Reconstruction Proclamation, it disenfranchised certain leading Confederates, including those with taxable property worth more than 20,000. So they might petition him for personal pardons. It called for special state conventions, which were required to repeal the ordinances of secession, repudiate all Confederate debts, and ratify the slave-freeing 13th Amendment. So this is what they had to do. Okay, this is what the plan was. Johnson wanted to pardon them, but not those who had a lot of property who were rich. They couldn't be part of any political position. Okay, so Johnson also granted a lot of pardons to the Confederate rebels, so to speak. Now, there was the black codes that the South were still making laws. Slaves weren't there, but they gave behavior laws, black codes, to make sure that the blacks will be still under the whites in the South. Many whites wanted to make sure that they retained their tight control that exercised over black field hands and plow drivers in days of slavery. Okay, so they were going to give them this kind of problem. Okay, now the blacks needed to work, so they just worked for the same thing. There's only one thing they could do. They were working in farms, because that's all they did. That's the only job description they had. So they worked back to the master. And what the masters would do is if they tried to, not sign the contract or forget their job, they would be breaking the contract, and then they would punish the blacks to work for free. So it was just like slavery all over again. And even blacks were not allowed to vote. So the blacks were still needed to depend on the whites for economic independence. So they had the status of sharecropper farmers. They would work in the same crop and they would give a percentage of that back to the landowner. Okay, congressional reconstruction. Now, the South wanted to, in a way, get back into power. Among them were 4 former generals, 5 colonels, and various members of the Richmond cabinet and Congress. So they were still there. Alexander Stephens, ex-vice president of the Confederacy, still under indictment for treason. Okay, so should they still be in politics? Now, what about the 3/5 clause? Remember that the South counted the population, but only 3/5 of the slave population. So the rebel states were entitled to 12 more votes in Congress and 12 more presidential electoral votes. So now that the slaves are counted as a full band, that means there's more representatives in the Congress. Southerners might join hands with Democrats in the North and win control of Congress, or maybe even the House. So there was more support in the South now that they had to count the slave population. Now they had to start passing civil rights bill for the African Americans, because the African Americans needed more freedom. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, as well as the 14th Amendment. Anyone who was born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. Okay, this is the 14th Amendment. Okay, so they wouldn't deny blacks the right to vote. Okay, and the 15th Amendment would be the right to vote. Okay, swing around the circle with Johnson. Now, Johnson kept vetoing any measures to help the blacks. So, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, they were the radical Republicans who wanted to make sure that things would be passed. So this is how the United States looked like at that time. All of these southern states are now under military districts. Military district 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're back in the United States, but they have to be under these generals to keep order in the South, to make sure that there's no one trying to rebel again. Okay. They're all going to be, all the military is going to leave, stop watching over them. Last will be 1877. So the Reconstruction Act did that. That was what was that called, by military district, all led by a general. Okay, and 15th Amendment, the black vote, anyone could vote. And this is what they had to, America was going to go through. The Women's Loyal League gathered 400,000 signatures on petitions asking Congress to pass a constitutional amendment prohibiting slavery. 15th Amendment proposed that no one would be denied the vote, no matter what race or color. And yet women still couldn't vote. The realities of radical Reconstruction in the South. So they started to try to vote for African Americans. So they looked for smart ones. They formed the Union League, and they actually had some success. 14 black congressmen and 2 black senators were there. But however, although they were, even Bruce, Blonde J.K. Bruce, although they were in good positions, however, they were still going to be a lot of persecution that they would have to go through. Scalawags and carpetbaggers. These old scalawags were Southerners, often former Unionists and Whigs. So those who supported the Union and you're from the South were called a scalawag. Carpetbaggers are people from the North who come down to make money, to make business, northern businessmen. So they were also feeling like little persecuted, oppressed for being from the North. the KKK. Now, how can the whites still, enforce their dominance over black people? Well, they could threaten them and scare them, and that was the KKK. The KKK was that they were going to scare them, and they're gonna hide their group in these, dancing clubs, missionary societies, and rifle clubs. But what they would do is they would plan where they would, um, persecute the black people. Okay, now Johnson was going to be impeached. Now, he wasn't guilty. They wanted to get rid of him because he was firing people. But Andrew Johnson knew that in his cabinet there was a spy, in a sense, like a snitcher to the radical Republicans. That's why he got rid of him. But they tried to get Johnson in trouble for doing that, but he didn't. He wasn't impeached. He wasn't fired. Okay. In the meantime, Secretary of State William Seward, he buys Alaska for 7.2 million. Now, many people criticize this. Like, what's there in Alaska? Well, they didn't realize it. But they thought that it was just buying a huge icebox, refrigerator, walruses, and this. Then they're going to know that it's going to be a good deal because there's going to be a lot of oil found there later. Okay, so this is the Reconstruction chapter. Okay, here we are in chapter 23, Political Paralysis in the Gilded Age. Now, this is a, if you notice, 1869 here is where it begins to talk about this political paralysis era. Now, this is also at the same time overlapping with the Reconstruction era. So there's almost like two names for the period after the Civil War, but the one that's directly connected to the effects of the Civil War is obviously the Reconstruction era. So you tend to put those two together. But do not be confused by putting political paralysis, or this age is called the Gilded Age, right after the Civil War. It's connected to a bigger thing in the future that's up until 1896. So this is a time where the word paralyzed, right? This is the politics became so corrupted that we can say that it was paralyzed. So there was a time when the government becomes very corrupted, and actually the businesses corrupt them as well. So we'll talk about how this happens. So after Andrew Johnson becomes president, after this president Johnson, it's going to be General Grant. Now people vote for General Grant simply because he was the winner for the Civil War, and he doesn't have much political experience. He failed in a lot of things, but because he was popular as a general, he became the president. And he is kind of going to give the Republican Party a bad name through him. Okay, the Republicans, freed from the Union Party coalition of war days, enthusiastically nominated Grant for the presidency in 1868. Okay. Wealthy Eastern delegates demanded a plank promising that federal war bonds be redeemed in gold, even though many of the bonds had been purchased with badly depreciated paper greenbacks. So this is the Ohio idea. So what happens is during the Civil War, they paid some soldiers with a new kind of paper currency called greenbacks. Now that the Civil War is over, can you still use those greenbacks to buy things, or can you just exchange it to the current paper money at that time? So this was called the Ohio idea. Now the Midwesterners love this idea because they want to just exchange it to the same value, but some people didn't want to do that. So we're going to see if this is going to work well. So Grant won, and of course the slaves helped him win. Okay, now here is the era of good stealings. So you're going to see some corrupted people here who are going to take advantage and see some loopholes in the market. Jubilee, Jim Fisk, and Jay Gould. Okay, freewheeling railroad promoters sometimes left gullible bond buyers with only 2 streaks of rust and a right of way. Unscrupulous stock market manipulators were a cinder in the public eye. Too many judges and legislators put their power up or higher. So what does this mean? Now you have to understand the market here. How do you corner the gold market? Okay, the slippery game would work if the federal treasury refrained from selling gold. Okay, so in the national government, they have their own money, right? They have their own treasury, right? Their treasure chest. They have people pay taxes. It all goes into something called the federal treasury. And if you want more money in there, what they could do is they could sell their gold, right? Sell their gold, but people don't really want to buy gold because no one really uses gold at cash registers, right? So people have to use paper money. So you just got to keep switching it, changing it with the federal treasury. So hopefully that no one's buying gold now. But there is a way to corner the gold market. Now, if you can bid the price of gold skyward while scores of honest business people were driven to the wall, what this means is that Fisk and Gold are going to put a lot of money in for gold. Okay, they're going to bid the price of gold skyward. Now, when you hear the word bid, there's the bidding price and the asking price, right? Now, the people who are asking is the one who is selling. They're asking for a high number, but the one who is buying, they're asking for a low number. So Fisk and Gold, they want to make the price really, really high because when they have the gold, they have gold, they're going to sell it at a high price. So imagine the gold market. There's the treasury has a gold market, and who knows how much the gold should be? It fluctuates. But what if Biscuit and Gold were able to, through some brother-in-law in President Grant's cabinet, they were able to make the gold really, really high. And finally, when it was time to buy, everyone bought the gold, and Fisk and Gold, J Gold, made a lot of money because they helped, and they helped bid the price high. So that is illegal to do. It's illegal to do that with a price market. There was also the Tweed ring. Okay, Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed is a man who controls the city and politics. Now, this is a thing called a political machine, which we'll talk about, and it was hard to catch him. Okay, so we're gonna see what this is, but just know that this guy, Tweed, Boss Tweed, he runs the city, and police fear him, politicians fear him, and even the middle class people fear him. He controls it. We'll see how that works in just a bit. Okay, a carnival of corruption. The credit mobilier scandal. Union Pacific Railroad insiders had formed the credit mobilier construction company and then cleverly hired themselves at inflated prices to build the railroad line, earning dividends as high as 348%. So how does this work? How does this corruption happen? Well, they pretended to be a construction company, and they say it takes this much to build a railroad when it really doesn't. And so they multiplied that percentage by 340%. So they pocketed a lot of money. They took the change when it really doesn't take that much. So they can do that by pretending to be a construction company, and they can hire other people and themselves. Whiskey Ring robbed the treasury of millions in excise tax revenue. So there were some people in the excise tax that are getting extra money. Even Secretary of War William Belknap resigned after getting bribes from suppliers to the Indian reservations. Now, a bribe is illegal to take. If someone says, hey, I'll give you this money if you do this for me, that's a bribe. Okay, so the Republican Party got so tainted, corrupted, that another Republican Party was formed called the Liberal Republican Party, and they nominated Horace Greeley to become the president. The Liberal Republican Party, making them different. Okay, the Liberal Republican Party, they were shooting for Liberal Republicans' agitation, frightening the regular Republicans into cleaning their own house before they were thrown out of it. The Republican Congress passed an amnesty act removing political disabilities from all but some 500 former Confederate states. Okay, so what does this mean here? The Liberal Republican Party is going to try to reclaim the Republican Party because right now the Republican Party is corrupted. Can Greeley and the Democrats swallow each other? So Horace Greeley's Liberal Republican Party and the Democrats, they're all talking bad, and they're trying to get each other. Okay, they're trying to, in an election, it's always like that. They talk smack and dirt, and Democrats and Liberal Republicans. So let's see if they can destroy each other. And if they do, then that leaves only the regular Republican Party to win. Okay, depression, deflation, inflation. Panic broke in 1873. Overreaching promoters had laid more railroad tracks, sunk more mines, erected more factories, and sold more grain fields than existing markets could bear. This is how a recession happens. Some business, some company borrows a lot of money to put more railroads in and hopefully make a profit. They sold the bank to look for some gold in those mines. And so they have to, buy some dynamite, hire workers to dig it, make factories, all of that. But if they don't get money, if they don't produce, they don't profit. If the profits fail to materialize, loans are not going to be paid. And then the house of cards comes fluttering down. So this is what's happening. Many people, many banks went under because of this. Even the Freedmen's Bureau, where a lot of African Americans put their money in, they lost a lot of banks. 7 million people lost their money in their savings. During the war, 450 million of the folding money had been issued, but it depreciated under a cloud of popular mistrust and dubious legality. But now, afflicted agrarian debtor groups, cheap money supporters clamored for a resistance of the greenback. So now that there's this depression, banks had no money to lend out. They said, okay, why don't we get the greenbacks to exchange? So they're trying to look for solutions to this debt, this recession that they're in. One of them was the greenbacks. Another one was the Resumption Act, which pledged the government to the further withdrawal of greenbacks from circulation and to the redemption of all paper currency and gold at face value beginning in 1879. So the thing is, we got to get more of the regular money out there. Let's go pull out the greenbacks and pull out the gold, put it back in, because a lot of people want to go buy gold and now they want to get it back. And then what about silver? Can we make money out of silver if we find silver? So silver was only worth 1/16 as much as gold, and they wanted to drop it. Congress formally dropped the coinage of silver in 1873 until they found more silver, and then it made the price go down even more, meaning that it wasn't going to be worth a lot as it used to when they turned it into the treasury. So you call this contraction. It's just the deflationary effect. The amount of money per capita in circulation actually decreased from 1870, 1880, 1942 to 1937. So this is what happens. The value of money went down. That's what happens in the Depression. Redemption day came. A few greenback holders bothered to exchange the lighter and more convenient bills for gold. So people felt rich if the greenback was going to be redeemed, but if they didn't use it, then it's pretty much useless. Here we have the Gilded Age, and the Gilded Age is the corruption of the politics. This Gilded Age is what happens when there is a lot of fake things going on, and you can call this Gilded Age. Was labeled by Mark Twain. It's when gold is fake. So imagine a rock where you paint it with gold, right? And you think it's actually heavy as gold, and you sell it, but realize that inside of it was just all rock. That's called Gilded Age. It represents how the government was shiny in the outside, but inside it was all corrupted and fake. So this is the politics at this time. 80% of the voters cast their ballots in presidential elections in the 3 decades after the Civil War. Okay, so what is the political parties like? The Republicans tended to be Puritan, meaning strict codes of morality, meaning the morals were very important of a person. Believed that government should play a role in regulating both the economic and the moral affairs of society. That's what the role of government should be. Democrats was quite the opposite. They were more Lutherans and Roman Catholics, and they believed that it's okay for humans to be weak and to make mistakes. Their religions professed toleration of differences in an imperfect world, and they spurned government efforts to impose a single moral standard on the entire society. So there is Democrats were mostly in the South, Republicans were mostly in the Midwest and Northeast. And the Grand Army of the Republican Party were made up of many of these veterans here. So just remember, these are just talking about Democrats. So many people use patronage. This is like, patronage means the party system in a way. This is how we, like families in Guam, they vote for their own family or their own friends, and then they give them jobs when they get in. That's called patronage in America. So there's two kinds of groups, the stalwart faction and the half-breeds. So these guys they form this sort of group. Okay. All right. Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. This is the Republican and this is the Democrat. They were running against each other in 1876. Now, surprisingly, there was a tie. So they had to throw the count in the Congress. And there was also a tie when they voted in the Congress. So how do you break a tie? Instead, the Democrats and Republicans made a deal. They said, the Democrats said, if we allow the Republicans to win, then remove all of the federal troops that remains, that's watching over us. Remember, there was a military district based on the Reconstruction Act. There was 5 military districts in America, in the South, to watch over them. And the Democrats saying, we'll break the tie by allowing you guys to become president. Let's remove these guys off our front yard. Okay, they want to remove their Union military or the U.S. military out of the South. That was what the deal was. And so the Republican Party quickly abandoned the commitment to racial equality. By doing that, you're saying that we want to control the blacks in the South. And so the Republican says, okay, agreed. Civil Rights Act of 1875 was, in a sense, the last feeble gasp of congregational radical Republicans. So now Jim Crow is going to reign. The Democrats redeemed themselves in 1877. Southern power is back. Blacks who try to assert their rights face unemployment, eviction, and physical harm. Now that the soldiers are gone, they cannot protect the blacks anymore in the South. Blacks and poor whites were forced into sharecropping and tenant farming. Properly in system. So now they're in this sharecropping. What this means is all the blacks worked under the former plantation and they let them rent a land to make profit, but then they have to give their crop back to in a way, the landlord. But then the remaining crop that they had for themselves wasn't enough money. So they were still poor. And they passed laws, well, Jim Crow laws, which is almost like slavery. Made it difficult for them to vote. There was not literacy requirements, voter registration, poll taxes, which blacks couldn't afford. Then they had a case. Is it okay to separate people? So separate but equal, based on Plessy versus Ferguson case. They said, we are separated, schools are separated, restrooms are separated between whites and blacks, and that is separate but equal. But in reality, the facilities weren't equal. So that's really an unequal law. Railroad cars, restrooms. Southern whites dealt harshly with any black who dared to violate the South's racial code of conduct, most often for the crime of asserting themselves as equal. So if the blacks try to make themselves feel equal and rising up, the South would not make them have it. So that's what's going on. That's what went on in the South when they were able to redeem themselves. So the South got back into power. Okay, what about in other places? There's a lot of class conflicts, like the middle class, high class, low class, and ethnic clashes. So let's talk about this. So there was class warfare. When the presidents of the nation's 4 largest railroads collectively decided to cut employees' wages by 10%, the workers struck back. So when there was no lifting of the wages. There was work stoppages. People were striking, and workers and soldiers were both going against each other. This is a time of a lot of strikes, railroad strikes. And also, a lot of Chinese started to come into San Francisco, the Golden State. 75,000 Asian newcomers, the beginning of the Asian migration is building up great momentum now. A lot of them were from Guangdong, southern China, and they were the ones that built many of the railroads in the West Coast. But they couldn't speak English, they have a hard time. So most of them had menial jobs, countrymen, or laundrymen, cooks, domestic servants. But it was hard for them to go to even get a job because they had a long time to assimilate, and to speak English was very difficult. Actually, they got abused a lot by Dennis Kearney. He violently abused the Chinese, you know, by saying, do not hire these guys. Some of these Chinese were abused, were ridiculed. They even cut their pigtails that's behind their head. And they even tried to get a law, Chinese Exclusion Act, to ban Chinese from coming into America. This is a racist act. But the Supreme Court said, based on US versus Wong Kim, you cannot ban Chinese Americans who already became a US citizen. That is the law. So fortunately, they weren't able to be deported because they were already US citizens for being born there. Okay, then the election happened again in 1880. So Garfield versus Arthur. I'm sorry, Garfield and Arthur versus who is he going against? Blaine and Conkling. So these guys are partnering up to run. Arthur becomes the president of the United States. Now this is a because of the party system, the patronage system. That's the only way he won. But he didn't give everyone a job just because he got the vote. People were expecting that. So this was a problem. Is it right just because someone voted for you or helped you that you can get a job? So they passed the Pendleton Act. This is a major civil service reform, meaning that just because they're your friends or your family, you have to pass a test, competitive examinations in order to get this job, not just because they're part of your political party. Okay, so this is called the Civil Service Reform. Big changes. That's based on the Pendleton Act. Okay, and then an election in 1884, James Blaine, Republican, versus Grover Cleveland, Democrat. And again, they're going to talk dirty, talk trash against them. Republicans said to the Democrats, because they were talking about how one of them committed adultery, another woman. But strangely, a Democrat wins. It's the first time a Democrat would win. Cleveland wins, the first Democrat since the Civil War. Remember how the Democrats were siding with the South, not the Republicans. So this shows that the Southerners were able to convince the whole nation to vote Democrat. And so how would the Southerners, Cleveland names two former Confederates in his cabinet. Cleveland favored the cause of reformers, but he eventually caved into the carpings of Democrat bosses and fired almost 2/3 of the 120,000 federal employees, including 40,000 Republicans. So again, he's firing people who are not for his patronage, his political side. And then one of the things is military pensions. There were many people who stopped on Civil War received a lot of money. These were called pensions. He wanted to stop that. But there's a lobby group who was pushing the government, Grand Army of the Republic, lobby group pushing the government to keep those pensions coming in. So they made it more clear. Benefits were granted to deserters, to bounty hunters, to men who ever served. So it was just for anyone. Now Cleveland wants the battle for a lower tariff. Okay, so high duties continue to pile up revenue in customs houses. Okay, and they had to now there was a lot of money in the treasury, 145 million. This is embarrassing. Most of the government's income in these pre-income taxes came from tariff. One was to squander on pensions and pork barrel bills and thus curry favor with veterans and other self-seeking groups. The other was to lower the tariff. So when there's a lot of money, it sounds like good, right? It's bad when you don't spend it, because that's what people are giving the money for, so that it should be spent. Should they just spend it on government pensions, meaning people who are retiring, or should they just lower the tariff? So, but Cleveland chose, instead of give it to the people, he says to lower the tariff. So now they're going to choose another president, Benjamin Harrison, whose father was William Henry Harrison. Benjamin Harrison wins the presidency. Now, what's he going to do with $1 billion Congress? There's a lot of money from all the tariffs that they're going to use. That's why they call it the $1 billion Congress. Congress showered pensions on Civil War veterans and increased government purchases of silver. So to help people who have silver, they're going to buy silver from them and give them a lot of money. The money's going to come out to a lot of people. and they're going to pass the McKinley tariff to raise the tariff again even higher. So William McKinley tariff. So then people had no choice but to buy American goods because it was going to definitely be cheaper than foreign goods coming in. Okay, this high tariff is going to cause a problem. It's going to lead to the Populist Party, or the Farmers Alliance. Frustrated people in the West, the farmers, are going to demand justice. They demand inflation through free and unlimited coinage of silver. They want more money because it's not enough, or they have a lot of silver but they don't have gold. They also want graduated income tax, and the biggest enemy was the railroad. The railroaders were taking advantage of many of the farmers in the West, paying them high prices to transport their food to the East Coast or West Coast. Okay, they want direct election of U.S. senators because it's so corrupted that U.S. senators need to be elected by the people. Back then, U.S. senators weren't elected by the people; they were elected by their own state legislatures. A one-term limit on the presidency. All of these things are asking, and the adoption of an initiative referendum, meaning that instead of the Congress making laws, let the people make the laws and vote for the laws because Congress is too corrupted to think for the people. Okay, and to shape legislation, meaning a shorter workday and immigration restriction. This is the Populist Party. A lot of them were suffering and they were upset. So this is the Populist Party. They tried to get General Weaver to win. They got even more people to combine, but they didn't get all the races. The Colored Farmers Alliance, they didn't, because they were kind of racist. So they could combine all these union parties in a sense together, Farmers Alliance, to get more justice, but it wasn't enough. So you can see in blue, all of here, the West farmers tried to get with the election. Cleveland won the election. The Populists divided the Republicans, because the Republicans, here we see in yellow, and the Populists, they separated the North, but the Democrats still were all united, so they remained to be strong. Debtors were up in arms, workers, so. The whole point was, how do you get money to become more valuable when there's all kinds of money? There's greenbacks, and then there's silver, there's gold, there's paper currency. So what they want to do is exchange all of those for just one currency that's high, and that's the paper currency there. It's either silver or gold. William Jennings said silver, and then McKinley says gold. And the United States was now in grave danger of going off the gold standard and moved out, render the nation's currency volatile. So because their gold standard was so different from the rest of the world, they're going to not trade gold with America. Okay. All right. Cleveland's secretive dealings with J.P. Morgan. So J.P. Morgan helped Cleveland in his financial problems. So the Republicans, singing times are mighty hard, won the election. Democrats did not win this election. So that happens in 1896, and it was William McKinley that's going to win. Okay. So that's it. All right, here we are with chapter 24. Industry becomes of age. This is all about the economy until the 1900s, between after Civil War and towards the 1900s or the 20th century. Now the iron colt becomes an iron horse, meaning transportation improved so greatly that everything is becoming even more effective, substantial, more profitable. There's a lot of improvements, and that's because the government poured a lot of money into expanding these railroads, these regions, and they just gave them to these companies. And they didn't pay the companies in money. They paid these railroad companies in land, and that's even better than money because you can always triple the value of that land. So wherever they built the railroad, the people get to be granted that land, right? So that was the plan. So it made these railroads really, really rich. These guys really, really rich. As you can see, Minnesota had a lot of, around Wisconsin, just because there's a lot of farmland here to transfer from left to right. Okay, so all of these were just many people could turn these land into gold or collateral for loans. So it was just, no matter what, it was going to make these railroad companies huge. So spanning the continent with rails, there's some big railroad companies that united the nation. United the nation from east to west, and that's a Union Pacific Railroad. Laid a lot of track. Credit Mobilier, well, of course, pocketed money, and also the Central Pacific Railroad. Okay, Boomtown, Sacramento. These are the railroad companies that built America in a sense. Now, Central Pacific, where California started, they hired a lot of Chinese people to work on those railroads. Okay, the guys in blue are the ones who highlighted in blue are the names of the owners. Now, there were some railroads that were thought impossible, but then not just with sledgehammer, they broke through the rock, but even with a lot of dynamite. Okay. Tens of thousands of Chinese laborers went from dusk till dawn under their basket hats proved to be cheap, efficient, and expendable. Hundreds lost their lives in premature explosions. Finally, these two companies combined, the Great Northern Pacific Railroad and the Great Northern Railroad. They combined the railroads together, and then they formed the railroad in this sense. Okay. Some railroad companies thought they could make money, so they just almost like built built it anywhere. And they built one in the north that thought that there was going to be people living in those places, but no one was buying any tickets or loading anything there. So some people just from nowhere to nothing, right? Some railroad companies. Um, Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt. This is the guy who's gonna. Now you're gonna see many rich people's names here. Rich rich person, rich men who are going to put their names up, and one of them is Cornelius Vanderbilt. And he starts a steamboat, but then he's going to start in railroading. He's going to become really rich, and he's going to improve because instead of iron as railroads, he's going to use steel. And iron tends to crack, but steel is more flexible. So, and steel is going to be tougher than metal. Okay, so you're going to have this new revolution. This is Vanderbilt. Okay, revolution by railways. Now, there's the beginning of the first class. So the rich people would take this first class over here. Okay. The first class was also called the palace cars. Now, what's the big deal? Now, if you have the railroad, it could stimulate mining and agriculture, especially in the West. Farmers can now get to their land and carry their fruits out of their land and into the markets quicker. They could carry food to lots of people, so people wouldn't have to worry about starving or trying to make a living. Food would now come in quicker now that these railroads are being built in that sense. Sometimes offer to transport the newcomers free to their farms. Settlers following the railroads plowed up the tall grass prairies of Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, and Nebraska and planted well drained rectangular cornfields. Especially in Iowa, there's a lot of cornfields there that you would have to go through. Rapidly displaced the buffalo, which were hunted to near extinction. Now, the buffalo, there was a lot roaming around in the middle, but the railroads, one effect of it is that the buffaloes were being wiped out. There was so much buffaloes, but they were in the way of trains, and they can't just run them over because they would just crash. It would crash the train. So instead, they just hired a cowboy and shoot them all so that they could just get out of the way. Terrible. And also, it's the beginning of time zones. Why? It's because they didn't realize how fast they can travel. That the time zone would be different because they would head to the other place within an hour. So there'll be difference of time zones. Lords of the Rail. Remember, there was the Lords of the Lash. Now there's the Lords of the Rail. So the northern people are now getting rich in their own way, and now it's through the railroad companies. Again, Jay Gold, he's going to find ways to steal money again. Stock watering is one way to do it by inflating some sort of stock, making a claim that this is a good asset, and then people put their money in that investment, and then he takes the money for himself. All right. So the company never makes a profit for the people. But yeah, there's a lot of people doing that at that time, and there was no government who was watching them to stop them. And the rich people, the railroad barons, in a sense, the millionaires were bribing judges, legislatures, and arm twisting lobbyists. They were using with their money. They were able to afford to bribe people, and the senators would actually listen. The other railroad barons granted secret rebates and kickbacks to powerful shippers. Now, this is illegal to give a discount. Actually, when you give discounts to one farm and you don't give discount to the other farmer, that's actually illegal because that could destroy the other farmer. You might think, well, it's okay to give discount. No, because if the intention is to get rid of the other competition, and that's why you help this guy, then that's like destroying business in the wrong way. Now, the government needs to come in and bridle that iron horse. So this is what it's means. Government's now going to try to stop these things. First of all, the Grange patrons of husbandry are going to protest against this because the farmers are the ones getting hurt by the railroads. The railroads jack up the prices, makes it impossible for farmers to sell their goods in the outside market. The railroads are the only way the farmers could transport their goods out. But the railroads could also make it really difficult for farmers to make a profit by making the prices high. So they had a court case, the Wabash case, and it decreed that individual states had no power to regulate interstate commerce. So in this case, they said, you know what, states have they cannot do this. It's up to the federal government. So Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act, which prohibited rebates and pools and required the railroads to publish their rates openly, meaning they have to make it fair price for all the farmers. So that was a win. And also, how would they check that? So they established the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, to administer and enforce the new legislation. So now they're going to have this commission to come down and make sure people are publishing fair prices. So this Interstate Commerce Act was a big deal. It was the first attempt to regulate businesses. Now, there was no one watching over businesses or regulating business. There was no institution commissioned by the government to watch them, and now they have. So it foreshadowed the doom of freewheeling, buccaneering, and business practice served full notice that there was a public interest in private enterprise. So back then, there was all of this private business, and how private should it be? Should the government not be involved at all? No, it's time for the government to be involved and make sure that they are not taking advantage of of other businesses or poor people. Okay, so miracles of mechanization. When Lincoln was elected, the Republic ranked only fourth among the manufacturing nations of the world. By 34 years later, 1894, it was the first place. Okay, there was now millionaires. So what made them so rich? Because of course the natural resources now could be exploited, and the coal and oil and iron that's in America, especially found in Minnesota, was now being used and sold to to build the faster transportation system, to sell the steel, to make steel. So there's a lot of plentiful things you can do with that. Steel industry was a big deal because people needed that steel, and America was innovative with that. Okay, also inventions like the typewriter, like the electric railway, the refrigerated car. The refrigerated car is important because now it could ship food to faraway places. Alexander Graham Bell with the telephone, not only was the Morse code there, but beyond that, they were able to also have their voice heard in the other line, called the telephone, right? Thomas Alva Edison. Now, actually, it was him and Tesla, Nikola Tesla, who invented this light bulb, right? Um, and he was one that now what's the big deal about the light bulb? Because people would stop working at night, so what a waste of 4 hours of work and production. Now that there's a light bulb, now people could work longer instead of the 7 hours. People could now work longer. Now there's the big four, the big businessmen, right? Andrew Carnegie, tycoons. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. These guys were the big one, two, three. Actually, the other four is Vanderbilt. They are going to become the richest people in America and probably in the world at that time. And one guy is in charge of steel, one guy is in charge of oil, one guy is the bank. Okay, and all because they're able to know what to do with all the resources that's in America and make it efficient in selling to the whole world. Carnegie pioneered the creative entrepreneurial tactic of vertical integration. Now, vertical integration, if you can imagine, vertical integration is vertical, right? It's like going up and down or down to up, meaning that they're going to buy out all the phases of manufacturing from, for example, making steel, extracting the iron ore, buying the railroad that ships the iron ore, buying the factory that melts the iron ore, buying the factory that shapes the iron into steel. So that's vertical integration. And then there's another business practice called horizontal, by having a monopoly in all of the same products so that no one could you could own the whole thing, then you could control the prices. For example, if you buy all the oil in America, then you don't have to compete with anyone else. You can have just one price. So, trust. Stockholders in very smaller oil companies assign their stock company to the board of directors of a standard oil company. So trust became used to describe any large-scale business combination. So there's a business when it combines all other businesses into one, and one guy's over them all. You call that a trust, and it becomes a very powerful business. His prescribed remedy was to consolidate rival enterprises and to ensure future harmony by placing officers of his own banking syndicate on their various board of directors. Now, J.P. Morgan was pretty smart too. He was called the banker's bank, and he would loan money. He would loan money to businesses that need the money. And then he would say, hey, if I don't need this money, you have to have one of my guys as a board member. So that's how he would know what's going in every company. So the Bessemer process was actually a British inventor, which known how to turn iron to steel. And steel is stronger and lighter. Iron is heavier. But William Kelly did not know what to do with that invention. He actually came up with his own idea to use that great invention to make tea kettles, to make steel tea kettles instead of iron kettles. Well, Andrew Carnegie was the one that says, you know what, you can make your kettles, and I'm going to use this for railroad tracks because that's more important in America, and that's what people would need. So this is what Andrew Carnegie is. He, so he started as a small guy, bobbing boy, and then he works his way up, working hard, doing chores. He's a gifted organizer and administrator. He succeeded by picking high class associates and by eliminating many middlemen. His remarkable organization was a partnership that involved, at its maximum, about 40 Pittsburgh millionaires. So he was very organized. These were the pre income tax days when millionaires made real money and profits represented take home pay. So he made a lot of profit. JP Morgan and made a reputation of himself. This is who he was. He was called the banker's bank because he funded the railroads, insurance companies, and banks. Okay, so money power was dangerous. He got rich, and then he bought with 400 million. He bought out Carnegie. Okay, Carnegie gave away a lot of his money to public libraries, pensions for professors, and other philanthropy purposes. So he 350 million. He used it all for those purposes. The United Steel Corporation. Okay, so Carnegie launched and enlarged this United Steel Corporation and became one capitalized 1.4 billion. It was America's first billion-dollar corporation, a larger sum than total estimated wealth of the nation. Rockefeller grows and American beauty rose. Black gold. So they're going to realize that this oil is going to be very important. There's a lot of it in America. There was some oil business getting it from the whales, hunting whales. And now they're going to realize oil is going to be used for electricity, and that's going to become the standard oil company. And it's going to be used, obviously, for making oil refineries, which would be for cars later. Okay. And they're going to change that for the engine. So oil is going to become a bigger commodity and resource. So the gospel of wealth, what is this about? Is it really bad to make a lot of money? Because people were accusing them for making too much money. The Lord gave us this money because we know how to handle this money. So a lot of them said survival of the fittest, meaning that we worked our way up. We worked hard. That's why we're here. So you call this idea social Darwinism. Okay. And this is something that philosophy of evolution, but in the same sense, the philosophy of getting rich. If you work hard, you deserve it. Okay. Many of the rich, especially the newly rich, had pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. They buckled down and they weren't lazy. So you cannot get upset and frustrated and hating rich people just because they worked hard when they were young and you didn't. That is their philosophy. All right. You can't just blame themselves for being poor, but they worked hard. Okay. The Sherman Antitrust Act. Now, this is a law that made combining businesses illegal. If you combine a business, it becomes illegal because you're trying to get rid of the other business, right? But people were just getting too rich. There's two pictures of daughter and father playing chess, and then there's this mother and daughter eating as much peanuts as she could. This is what she was feeding. How about the South? Well, just shortly, tobacco. They're making cigarettes, and that's going to be their new moneymaker here. Virginia Tobacco Factory, 1880. And now cotton is now decreasing in New England, and spindles of cotton is increasing in the South. Picture of the economy here. Trust busting. Now, eventually, they're going to get away from the idea that private business should be private. No, time to check if they are taking advantage of workers or people or corporations, even immigrants. Okay, so they're going to start to see how corrupted the businesses are becoming, like child labor. Children are working in the caves and in the mines, and they should be going to school. They're not getting educated. Pittsburgh factory, for example. And then a new status of women, the Gibson girl. This is where women were going to be workers in these offices. Okay, so and these are a lot of kinds of problems with the new businesses, and now they're becoming an oligarchy, a kind of power at the top if you own a business. This is the Gibson girl here. Okay, so did the people try to fight against? Yes, they formed unions. Union is a group of people who agree to not work unless their boss or their employer gives them the pay, the hours, and better working conditions. Now, can they force the employer to do that? In a way, yes, because if you don't work, if a lot of people don't work, then they won't make any money. The company won't make any money. So that's why the employer, the boss, could listen and give them what they want. Now, but if the boss doesn't listen, the boss could just fire all of them and hire a lot of workers from Europe because they won't say anything, unlike the current American employees. Okay. So there would be a lockout and there would be some strikes. Okay, and they would know which employees would be the ones who would be doing a strike. So a lot of unions would try to be formed to provoke them to make sure they put the boss in place, the employer. Okay, so unionization was being formed. So this is a chapter of a lot of unions. The National Labor Union. a bunch of workers, 600,000, including skilled, unskilled farmers who are going to agree. Now, if you were all get all the jobs together and say, hey, let's all agree not to work, then all of these bosses will listen to us, and then they will, give us what we demand. Colored National Labor Union, Knights of Labor, Noble and Holy Order, all these institutions are unions. Okay, what are they fighting for? For example, the Knights won a strikes for an 8-hour workday. Back then, they're working 10 to 12 hours, and they want an 8-hour shift. So the bosses would force them, and that's kind of messed up because they're the boss, right? If you don't work 8-hour shifts, you can get fired. So the bosses tend to just trap people. Now, even if the people will try to protest, sometimes there'll be some terrorism going on. For example, the bloody Haymarket Square episode. Labor disorders had broken out, and on May 4, the Chicago police, there was a bomb. Someone threw a bomb in the middle of the protest. And then finally, the 8-hour movement, the AFL formed, the American Federation of Labor, led by Samuel Gompers, consisted of self-governing national unions unifying all together. Pure and simple unionism is this, he said, they sought for better wages, hours, and working conditions. This was their trade agreement. Here's the Knights of Labor right here. Okay, so that'll be it.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 25, America moves to the city. So again, this is the time period right at the outset of the Civil War to the 20th century or the 1900s. It's all about how the city's forming, and it'll be definitely different than the way cities were in colonial times, from the beginning of the founding of America and up until the Gilded Age. And these cities are now very different because this people are just crowding even more than ever in such a place in like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. And so it's time to build these skyscrapers. And this is the beginning of buildings moving upwards, meaning you cannot really expand horizontally, but vertically now to fit in as much people in a designated area. And this is up to the architectures. For example, like Louis Sullivan, he is going to perfect the electric elevator so that people can move to the top. Now, back then, these buildings were all concrete, but actually, you cannot build with concrete too much. If you put levels of concrete, then there'll be so much pressure in the bottom that it could collapse the first or second floor. So they'll be only up to 7 or 8 stories max. And then after that they would have to do lighter on top of it. But skyscrapers will now be made out of steel. We'll see that in just a bit. And also, you can see the streets are so messy. There was no organization in which cars could go. So they had to, this will now change slowly. They'll get rid of these horses. Slowly, they'll be ordered. Now, you can see there's a lot of police trying to direct the traffic because it's just so crowded. They're going to have a different organization for these cities. And also, the industrial jobs are growing as well. Um, you have electricity becomes a thing, indoor plumbing becomes a thing, telephones. Now all these lines, pipes are all going to have a place to go in developing this new city. Okay. So also bridges are going to be an important invention because back then bridges were only made out of concrete and not steel. There's actually steel beneath these roads because concrete cannot hold in that middle point in between these two pillars. Concrete would just collapse, right? So if that was the case, then both ships wasn't able to pass before. But now steel is stronger and flexible, and these rails, steel rails, can hold up the steel platforms and hold up cars and railroads. So that's why it's going to allow more transportation. It's going to allow more movement of people places quicker from their homes to their workplaces. So this is going to be a big change in America's city life. Okay, so more people are moving from farmer life to city life actually, and they're now going to do mail order housing such as Sears and Montgomery Ward. So there's no more there's no more moving into stores now. There's a new kind of way to order, in which it'll come to you in that sense. So yeah, there's that shift to the city. The jagged skyline of America's perpendicular civilization could not fully conceal the canker sores of a feverish growth. Humanity compressed. That's pretty much what it is. Now, because there's so much population growth in a particular place, it also created slums in these areas. Slums are obviously crowded, filthy, more rat infested. And so, it also led to these foul places, which we call the slums. This poor people, right? And they wouldn't have good plumbing. Trash would just be outside. And more people are moving in. There is this new immigration, an urban magnet. More people from Europe moved in, and this time from Eastern Europe. Remember, in the first 1800s, it was the British people, okay, and it was people coming from Western Europe. But now it's slowly moving to the east. Italians, Croats, Slovaks, Greeks, and Poles are now moving into America. These are the new immigrants. And then now you would form little Italy's, little Poland's in New York and Chicago. Okay, and immigrants tended to live around their ethnicity or race. Okay, so a lot of them were like, it was like Southern Europe uprooted, okay, and moved into America. And America offered different lifestyles. For example, there's these American letters, and there were people writing who recently moved into America explaining how there's no military conscription, there was freedom of religion here, they could eat meat 3 times a day. So there's just so much people wanting to move. You can see all these Italians here moving in, immigrants here. Okay. So many of them, especially, would live right by the port because that's where they would arrive, and especially New York. And here we have Jews starting businesses here. So Jews also they themselves were trying to make money. The Jewish people are women working in the sweatshop here, and a lot of German Jews, because of also they're being persecuted, that many of them were refugees in America. Okay, and some are just temporarily moving into America. Some immigrants, so you call them birds of passage. They go there to make money, and then the bird goes back home, right? So people go back with that money to their European place. The Jewish people established Hebrew schools. They have a different way of eating, so kosher food was their thing. And also, not only Jewish people, there's Polish parishes, Greek restaurants, Italian social clubs. So these Europeans are creating their own distinct culture within America and their own activities and events. Okay, so here is just a manifest of all these kinds of types of immigrants. You see Russians coming in here. Yes. Okay. Now reactions to the new immigration. So good and bad. Of course, these immigrants are desperate, so they will try to get a job. Unfortunately, they would fall into the trap of notorious boss Tweed, political machines. What this means is he will say, "I'll give you a job, but you have to vote for me." So this guy Tweed, not vote for him, but also vote for whoever politician that suits him, that suits his economic benefit, and even in a corrupted way to get money from these politicians. So politicians would even be serving him or doing him favors so that they could remain a politician because he controlled votes. So he would tell the immigrants, "Hey, vote for this guy if you want a job, because I need that guy to be under me still." So that's why he was called Boss Tweed. Okay, so in return for their support of the Poles, the boss provided jobs on the city's payroll, found housing for new arrivals, and tided over the needy with gifts of food and clothing. Okay. On the good side, there would be some people, churches, who would try to help these immigrants to adjust. And so churches now switch from this spiritual to the physical help that they can need. And that is by helping them to adjust, giving them a job. And you call these guys Christian socialists, helping these people to be wealthy, or not wealthy, but at least enough to survive. Jane Addams is one of them also, who's going to start this American Settlement House movement to get people to be here and to be in her settlement house in order for her to teach them English, watch their kids in the meantime. Yeah, and she's gonna win this Nobel Peace Prize. So people will go to these settlement houses, and you can imagine an immigrant coming to America who can't speak English. They're gonna have a hard time unless they could teach them English, teach them where to go, what to do, what laws to avoid, what people to avoid, and that's where a settlement house would be, right, to help them to overcome all those difficulties. So settlement houses became a center of women's activism and reform. Florence Kelly, for example, lifelong battler for the welfare of women, children, blacks, and consumers, eventually formed the National Consumers League. Okay. So all these are women are the ones forming these institutions, because men are working. So these organizations, institutions, these clubs for moral purposes, moral movements are really done by women mostly, this part. Although hours were often long, pay low, and advancement limited, a job still bought working women some economic and social independence. Okay, nativism. Now, not all the Americans welcome these immigrants coming in. You can see by this picture, a lot of these so-called Americans were looking as hypocrites because their ancestors, their father, grandfather, whatever, were immigrants themselves, and now they're saying stop to these new immigrants coming in. So they are, making it look like people are against immigrants because, there are some racism still. They looked at them as culturally and religiously exotic hordes. A lot of them, because they were of a different European blood. They believed the Anglo-Saxon, the Western European, or British European was of the better sort. Um,
So that's why they felt like that. And old and new immigration comparisons are here. You can see the in blue, the Southern and Eastern Europeans came in later, and the Western Europeans, like the British, came in earlier, and now it's switching off to the Italians, Poles. Now, a lot of people look for reasons to stop these immigrants from coming in. For example, the Know Nothing Party or the American Protective Party didn't want these immigrants to bring in their intellectual baggage, like their philosophy of socialism and communism. That was a lot in Eastern Europe, communism especially. Communism was a worrisome in America because communism was not just telling people to not believe in religion, but it affected and attacked private businesses because communism is public business, right, where the government controls the business, but America is private. Capitalism means leave the business alone for the most part. And so they started to make immigration laws restricting people from coming in. First, they start off with criminals and convicts. Yeah, that makes sense. But then they started to include insane people, polygamists, alcoholics, anarchists, people carrying diseases. These would be banned. They even tried to ban Chinese people. So all of these are just people not comfortable with bringing more immigrants in because of their prejudice against them. The Republic owes, though, much of their latecomers to the brawn, brains, courage of the diversity of America. Because these immigrants, that's how they were able to jumpstart the economy and produce a lot of labor for these companies. Okay. All right. Churches confront the urban challenge. So yes, urban is a challenge. You have there's so many people coming in. How do you get crime rate low? How do you get people working together, companies and transportation? This is going to be very difficult. So John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, these guys are gonna try to help them out. They're rich people, and they're going to not believe that they could help them with their money by jobs. Social gospel. D.L. Moody also was a guy, a preacher from Chicago, former shoe salesman, and then he tells people to work hard for religious purposes, right? Protestants sought to meditate between labor and capital, science and faith, religious and secular values. Okay, Cardinals James Gibbon, he supported the American labor movement. He was popular, trying to get people to be more sympathetic to these immigrants coming in. Salvation Army was created too. Now this was from Britain, but now it started to become like a charity, social, for giving free soup. So yes, there's all these kinds of church social gospels, all trying to help the city's poor and the disadvantaged, young men, women, and Christian Association, also known as the YMCA. Okay, again to help these youth to have things to do. So back then there were poor youth making a lot of trouble and getting taken advantage of by criminals, but now the YMCA gives them something to do. Okay, that there's the philosophy also of Darwinism starting to become popular on the origin of species. Okay, saying that species evolved, humans evolved too, and it all started with one big bang, and everyone is connected. All the species are connected. We're all from animals at some point of time, and then because of the natural selection by nature, survival of the fittest, we're stronger. We're stronger than the others. That's how we outlasted the others. So how does the church react to this now? Do they accept that Adam and Eve were not created, but they were just an evolved cell species? Right? So churches had to compromise, and they say, "Oh, this is part of God's word." Some say, "No, this is not true. This is only God created everything. This is the infallible word of God, and this idea of evolution is against the Bible." And so you call this creationism fundamentalism. Okay, people who believe in creation, they're fundamentalists. They believe the Bible's true. They don't believe in this evolution theory thingy. Okay. Okay, so the lust for learning. Okay, so now universities are being created even for, um, universities are was one or okay. So schools were once it wasn't tax supported. Now it is. Now using taxes, education is becoming compulsory. Now this is kind of companies didn't like this because they needed child labor to pay cheap workers, right? Because they're just children. But now they're saying kids shouldn't be working; they should be going to school. So um, the idea of high school is now going to be mandatory even up to there. Free textbooks are going to be provided, and the taxes of the states, taxpayers' money will go to that too. Normal schools, kindergarten was going to be an idea borrowed from Germany, and it's going to be, going to be applied into these schools. And the Chautauqua movement, a successor to the Lyceums, which was launched in 1874 on the shores of Lake Chautauqua in New York. This is just like a tent of education, right? People in tents are going around teaching people, and it's almost like free education to help educate people what's going on, because right then education wasn't so spread, right? It's not like they all had libraries in one place, not like they had the internet. So how'd you get learning, to spread better than this movement of people, teachers in a sense, special educators, intents would move from place to place to just bring the education to people. Okay. All right. Now, even for the black people, Booker T. Washington, education for black people. So they were trying to, black people from slavery, they're free, but they need to be educated. A lot of them, if they cannot read, they can't work. It'll be very difficult for them to understand what to do, except farming, right? That's the only thing they could do. So Booker T. Washington suggested that just do anything, just pick up a shovel. You don't have to try to do something that is so complicated, like go to university, do something that you can do in the meantime. W.E.B. Du Bois was against that. He said, we are worth more than just picking up shovels. We got to go to college and all that stuff. Says manual labor is condemning. So he want all black people should be to go to college, But Booker T. Washington was just becoming really practical with the black people, saying just got to make an honest living with whatever you can. There was other black people who were famous. George Washington Carver, agricultural chemist. Okay, he discovered what you could do with peanut, shampoo, axle grease, sweet potato, vinegar, soybean, and so forth. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois, he helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Okay, this is for the talented 10th, which means that the black people, this was made to help give more equality for the black people, and it's going to lead to the civil rights movement in the future. So remember that NAACP. Okay, so here you just got universities here. Women's colleges are being established, black universities. The Morrill Act of 1862, the Enlightened Law, provided grant for public land. So there are state colleges who may not be receiving direct money in a sense where teachers, professors get paid from their taxes, but the land grants, meaning they don't have to buy the land, the government will just give the land so these universities can have a head start in starting these. So you call that a state university. The Hatch Act provided federal funds to establish agricultural experiment stations. So it's a lot of grants and money from the government that are just in different areas. University of California, Ohio State University, Texas A&M. Also, philanthropists, rich people, also give money to the poor, or give money to these universities, right? John D. Rockefeller gave money, Vanderbilt gave money for universities, and John Hopkins University. So a lot of these philanthropists would donate a lot of money. Okay, from the March of the Mind, this point on, we're gonna have a lot of highlights that are in blue and yellow. It's just basically books, philosophers who are creating a kind of culture in America, intellectual frontiers, right? So, for example, the principles of psychology, the study of behavior is now going to become important. American psychology is going to be a big deal. So, this is going to spread pragmatism, describe America's contribution to the history of philosophy. The concept of pragmatism held that the truth of an idea was to be tested, above all, by practical consequences. What this means is being pragmatic, meaning like very anti-superstition. Don't just believe in anything that your grandma tells you, folk tales, because people in Europe will bring that in. America's very against that. They want to see it based on evidence and truth and factual stuff. Okay. All right. So here, newspaper, also the kind of journalism being published. Okay, sensationalism, prostitutes, just becoming more not afraid to talk about like these things like sex, scandals, vulgar and bad words, call them prostitutes. Why would these magazines, journalists publish like that? Because it makes more money. That's why they would do that. Pulitzer Prize, Hearst. So yeah, they're getting more intense with their journalism. Okay, and then over here, you're going to have apostles of reform, just writing things, and I haven't highlighted what they're writing, what they're about. You could go ahead and read that. Also, famous books that now became movies today, and also were becoming TV shows. But back then, it was a very famous book that is made by Americans. General Lewis Wallace wrote Ben-Hur, which became a famous movie in the 60s, and also they remade it recently. Also, a Puritan writer who wrote some books too. Walt Whitman wrote the Leaves of Grass. Emily Dickinson, very famous, wrote 1,000 Short Lyrics. This is Emily Dickinson right here. A movie about her. Kate Chopin, The Awakening. Okay, Mark Twain wrote a lot of humor books. Funny, kids read it, and middle school students are reading Mark Twain books. Even I did. Huckleberry Finn was one of them. Tom Sawyer. Yeah, so these are the books that they would be writing. Also, history books, history of the United States, like Henry Adams. London, all these things that they're writing here. So it's just blue. Their names are in blue. Yes. Cultural beliefs like the new morality, Victoria Woodhull, free love, What she means by that is um, that it's okay to be divorced and it's okay to meet more men. And this women weren't doing that, but now that she wrote a book about it, she's saying that she does it, and more people got into it. So there's this divorce revolution. So people are not getting divorces are increasing. So back then, having a lot of children in the farmland was necessary, but in cities they had divorces, so there weren't many children under the same parent. Marriages were being delayed, and more couples learned the techniques of birth control. Okay, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Now there's a movement for people to organize some women's rights. Women weren't given particular rights. It could be wages, could be voting, but basically, yeah, they were trying to get this rights movement going for women to vote and other things, the equality of estate and other things, like wives to own or control their property after marriage. So there's so many things that women couldn't do, and now there's a movement to get that out in the open to make laws that could help them out. Ida B. Wells inspired Black women to mount a nationwide anti-lynching crusade because Black men and women were being persecuted for their beliefs. Okay, and then the National Prohibition Party, also women started this to get the 18th Amendment passed, which was to abolish liquor. So you call that prohibition, right? And it was, and being formed by women, by these groups in the beginning, Women's Christian Temperance Union, Anti-Saloon League. A saloon is a bar. So here they're trying to stop this. Even companies didn't like this because it was ruining the production of many things. Okay, so music also was changing. The blues and jazz is being formed to the American. Also, Edison creating instruments like the phonograph to record sound. Um, okay, and also amusements like, this is not like a zoo, but like just some people doing acrobatic stuff, cowboy stuff for it's like entertainment, which is like a circus, right? And not only circuses, but Wild Wild West shows, and also activities that are becoming like spectator sports are now becoming business-like as a consumer. Baseball, basketball, these spectator sports, football are now becoming money making. Okay, so that'll be it for today.